Hey, I'm Jim Hutchison from JimOnLight.com here at the Sea Changer booth at NAB show in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm here with a good friend of mine, T.J. Gerckens, lighting designer and artistic associate at Catco?
Managing director.
Managing director at Catco. I want to talk to you about your love of color, or hate of color, however you want to broach it. Tell me about how you like to utilize color in your work.
Well, being raised in many ways by Jim Ingalls back in the 90s, I generally start with white. I'm a big fan of less is more. I tend to work with a lot of white light, a lot of color correction, and then some pretty heavy splashes of color where it needs to be. And I think all of us like to think we don't have a style. We all think it's what the show's calling for. But you know what? Most of us have a style. Then I tend to, put a lot of color in the backlight and side light, but I've never tended to be a person who used a lot of the pinks, a lot of the magentas, but I think a lot of that is actually due to the kinds of shows I do. I don't tend to do a lot of musicals. I tend to do a lot of Mary Zimmerman's work, which she has an aversion to pink and an aversion to magenta and to purple, so I tend to be a little bit on the pale side. And one thing that's been kind of interesting to me on color in the last, 15 years is that I work a lot with the way color changes when a unit is dimmed. A lot of my calculations about a gel for a certain fixture is dependent on what intensity I think it's going to run at. And I remember one of my early shows I did, I had a lot of color correction in, and we did it on, and I'm going to date myself here, on the Altman 360 Qs. Those were the radial ones, not the chimney ones. And a whole lot of the color in the show came from running those things at 30%. And when the show was a big success and we transferred it to an all source 4 house. And I spent 2 weeks trying to figure out how to get that warm little glow that comes from running a Lee 103 at 30% or a Lee 203 at 20%. And it was interesting because I wondered if it was just me, and partway through text someone says, it doesn't quite have that feel. And I apparently hit it on the next incarnation. But it was really a challenge because so much of the way I work with color has so much to do with where it's going to run on the dimmer curve, which has been an interesting thing as I've started to move into HMI lights with some of my opera work, because of course HMI lights are usually doused, and so there is no color drop off, there is no red shift. And so that's proven to be quite a challenge. Do
you find yourself having that crazy battle with the arcs when you deal with HMI fixtures with color? Do you see it differently?
It feels different to me. Even the warm colors, when you filter them, feel cooler somehow. Or I love the phrase that Roscoe used to use in one of their color guides, that it felt brittle. I think that's what they used to have that in one of their color guides. But I feel that way. I used a set of HMI backlights at the Met recently, and they all have these scrollers on them. And I could make it warm, but it doesn't quite have that cozy warm of an incandescent, and I don't know how to describe it any more accurately than that. And I'm sure somebody with a color meter will argue with me.
I have commented on your work as, and I even called you one time the master of the amber drift, specifically because of the way that you deal with color in these fixtures like that. So when you find yourself in a situation dealing with HMIs or dealing with a very high intensity brittle source, how do you deal with it as a designer, like as an artist?
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing I do is extensive testing. I was really fortunate when I did my first show at the Met to have a guy who runs the lighting rental company in Columbus, Bright Lights, Bob Vance, say, sure, you can borrow my entire gel inventory and my lab. And another friend of mine, Marcus Webker, who loaned me an HMI source.
Nice.
And I spent probably 8 hours trying to figure out, okay, if I want what looks like Lee 103 in a source 4, what do I put in an HMI? I can do all the math I want, but and so I started out with some really painstaking research, and then honestly I started to ask for advice. One of the things about the guys at the Met, Wayne Chouinard and his team, is that they're so experienced with them. And then if I still wasn't quite getting what I wanted, I filled in with a light from an incandescent source from a different direction.
Nice.
To try to kind of feather the warmth in.
Sure. Do you find yourself preferring incandescent light just over everything else because of your experiences with it?
I would say, yeah, because I'm most comfortable with it. I think you like what you know.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
We're comfortable. The thing I liked in my experiences with HMI is as I got into color, the dichroic color mixers.
Gotcha.
That really was the first time using the VL 3500s, washes, and spots that I was able to create the colors I wanted quickly with HMI. One of the things I worried about with the HMI backlight Fresnels is that, you know, they're this big,
sure,
and the scrollers on them are this big, and they cost this much money. So, you know, you only have a certain number of options in there if you don't hit it right. And even the guys who seem to know the HMI weren't quite sure. And when I started using the VL 3500 washes, I was able to, with the CTO wheels and everything else, actually create the colors I wanted. And that was really exciting to get that kind of intensity with the colors I wanted. So,
I am so glad to have seen you again, TJ.
my pleasure.
Guys,
My
this is
pleasure.
TJ Gerckens, a lighting designer, freelance LD. I'm Jim Hutchison from JimOnLight.com, and I want to thank you for having me here at the NAB show at Sea Changers booth, and we'll see you next time.